You're good to go, Mr. Ragland.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the May meeting of the Finance and Appropriations Committee. Mr. Treasurer, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Green?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Jordan? Mr. Miller?
Here.
And Acting Chair Ragland?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to explain to the committee that I am acting chair today due to Mr. Cole being a bit under the weather. We could please keep him in your thoughts. That would be greatly appreciated. Our first order of business today is to approve the minutes from the April 14, 2021 Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting. Mr. Treasurer, everyone has been sent the minutes in advance of this meeting. Are there any questions from the committee or concerns regarding the minutes from the April meeting? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the April meeting of the FAC?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the minutes from the April meeting of the FAC. Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Acting Chair Ragland?
Yes.
Board Member Brown?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you, sir. And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. Mr. Bohoric, I will give you the floor for our monthly financial report.
And in due form, I will take the floor, and looking at the agenda, I will not relinquish the floor for quite some time this evening. So there we go. You have the display of the PowerPoint presentation here. And I'm trying to get my controls up here. Hang on, bear with me. It's not playing nice right now. I will stop and start again. Okay, I think that's better. Sorry for that. This is the, are you seeing the report okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. This is the monthly financial report for April. After presentation to the committee, it goes to the board next Tuesday. Through the year ending April, the end of April, year to date, revenues are up 38.8 million. They increased a bit from the 27.5 million above plan last month, and this month it's about 4.3% above plan. Expenditures, they dropped slightly, just 64.8 million under from 65.1 last month, and are now running just around 8% under plan. Cash balance is now 103 million above plan at 455 million at the end of April. Just looking at the flow of the cash balance, you can see again it's following the pattern of the prior year, albeit about 103 million higher than where we were before last year at this time. State aid is a highlight, one of the first highlights for the revenue side of the equation here. up 23.3 million year to date. We added about $1 million on a favorable variance this month. And remember, in that 23.3 million has included the Bureau of Workers' Comp dividend of 19.5 million, casino revenue that we didn't expect of about 2 million because we didn't expect it because of the pandemic. And then also that partial restoration of the 5.2 million cut that began a month or so ago to be received, and we'll continue to get that on a pro rata basis to the balance of the year. We expect that this line will end the year close to about 26 million above plan. Property tax allocation this month, 6.1 million year to date. And that's down from the variance last month, as it was an unfavorable variance last month. We did receive $16.8 million in the property tax allocation. As I looked at the plan, though, just so you know, the plan had the property tax allocation coming in over a 3-month period. That really should have been just honed in on 1 month. So what you're going to see is next month, the plan expects 7 million. We won't receive that because we've already got the money. And therefore this variance will be negative next month and actually bring property tax allocation. It will, in essence, eat up that 6.1 million above plan and end up right at or slightly below plan on a year-to-date basis. So there's some timing issues and some just the way I put the plan together for this year. Again, total revenues about 4.3% above plan at 38.8 million. It's just graphical representation of where we are. You can see that property taxes are right on target. State aid, again, running above, and all other revenues, when we break those out, you'll see that in just a minute. The map or the graph here, the monthly revenue, I think 2 things to note here. Number 1, for April, we're back to a level that is essentially that equal monthly payment plan, slightly above what we'd expect on equal monthly payment flow. And then in these out months, May and June, you'll see where the plan calls for it to drop off, but I believe it will remain consistent. And again, building the positive variance to that 26 million number I mentioned just a moment ago. This is the breakout of all those other revenues, albeit very small. The restricted federal grants are now in a favorable position, having received our 2 payments thus far this year. And we were expecting another payment here coming up in June. This year, we're looking for 3 payments because we didn't get one in fiscal year 20. The pandemic slowed things down. So we have 2. We're fairly well caught up. We hopefully will receive another one, and then that'll take this the equivalent of one payment over plan, which is really what I'm expecting. So we'll see. But it's just a timing issue with the federal government processing the rebate application. Property tax allocation, as I said, that favorable variance where it appears here that year to date's above plan, that will go away pretty much next month. And other revenues, as you know, that's where the pilots and investment income are. And pilots have been running ahead of plan. Looking at the heat map, everything on the revenue side is pretty much in the favorable territory, on plan or favorable. The percentage variances down there, as I explained at one point in time, while there are small dollar amount variances keeping us on plan, sometimes those percent variances get distorted with small movements in those lesser amounts in the plan. So this is all good news, all pretty favorable on the revenue side. Moving to expenditures, personnel dropped to 26.2 million under plan year to date. We had a monthly variance of 2.2 million over plan, all due to fringe benefit accounts running about 3.3 million over plan. And that was just, quite frankly, a miscalculation in the plan of the 3 pay month. This past month, April, was a 3 pay month. And if you look in the management discussion and analysis, and you look at the annual graph for the plan, you'll see that while salaries and benefits spiked appropriately for the 3-month plan, benefits didn't do that likewise in the plan. So this is an indication that we're going to run over plan in benefits. It's just that 3 pay month giving us some fits on a planning basis. Purchase services continue to run under plan, 1.3 million month to date, driving us to 21.6 million. on a year-to-date basis. Same categories: professional technical services, property services, electricity, and tuition to other districts top the year-to-date variances. They now range from 2.8 million to 4.6 million under plan individually. Charter, right on plan for the month. We were 42,000 over on a month-to-date basis. And they are running 5.7 million under plan. That should, we'll have some over plan variances, not much, but that'll decline a bit through the balance of the year because they also got restored, partially restored from their previous cuts. And then supplies and materials and capital outlay both continue their under plan behavior with a month to date 289,000 and 389,000 respectively under plan for the month. Just a graphical representation of where we are. You can see personnel under plan, a pretty sizable dollar amount, but percentage-wise, still within, I think that was in that 4 or 5% range. Charters right on target, and other expenditures, as we expand that out, you'll see that purchase services lead the way there in terms of contributing to that under plan variance. Our expenditure heat map, other than the personnel being moderately unfavorable for this month, as I said, due to the benefit accounts coming in higher, everything else is largely on plan or favorable. And in this case, favorable means running under plan. Comparing to last year, an update there. No real difference and no change really in property taxes. State aid, we are up, but remember, we've got those kind of one-off issues, the workers' comp and the casino revenue coming back in, and the restoration of the cut will all feed into that to contribute to that comparison to last year when state aid was reduced for the full year in 20. You can see there, it looks like a very large percentage variance, but again, the 490,000 received in that QSCUBI debt service reimbursement from the Fed, rebate from the Fed. Property tax allocation, that will resolve itself somewhat because last year it was received in May, not April as in this year, so that will dissipate next month. On the expenditure side, we're running above last year, ahead of last year, in total about almost 4% on personnel. It's interesting, supply materials and capital outlay, although running under plan this year, we are above where we were at this time last year in both of those categories. So we are spending more in those categories this fiscal year. And lastly, again, advances out. I've talked to you about those before. We're funding on a cash flow basis, WCBE and the Latchkey program. And as you can see here, we're building a cash balance. Last year at this time, we were at about 377 million. We're at 455 million this year. So in closing, revenues continue to run above plan. Expenditures are coming in under the plan. I'll remind you that the plan was based upon the 5-year forecast. And as you heard in the last presentation, or the presentation last meeting, we changed that methodology to try and have it approach more of a cash flow plan. So if we use that as a basis for our monthly spending plan in the next fiscal year, we should be much closer in terms of these variances. So that's it for the monthly financial report for April. And I'll be glad to answer any questions or move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Behort. Committee, are there any questions for the treasurer this afternoon?
Hey, Chair, I have a quick question for treasurer.
Yes, sir. Please proceed, Mr. Miller.
Okay. Yeah, the restricted federal grants. What was that again? And when you say it's restricted, is it restricted to a certain use, or I know it's not a lot of dollars, but just wondering.
Yeah, we issued qualified school construction bonds years ago, and part of that issue was that the federal government would rebate a portion of the interest expense on those bonds. And so we file a form every year. They rebate a certain portion of that. And that's what that is. It's restricted for a reimbursement for those interest expense on those bonds. And that's one of the items that really is run through the debt service fund, but because it was really a general fund type expense, they want us to display it here in this report and run it through the 5-year forecast in this manner. But it's just a federal rebate of interest expense on those qualified school construction bonds, which we affectionately call Q-Scoobies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we will move that report forward for the consideration by the Board of Education. Mr. Treasurer, I believe we have school bus updates coming next. The floor is yours.
Yes, we do. And we should be there. On the agenda, this is referred to as a bus purchase plan. We really titled this a student transportation fleet replacement plan because there's more to student transportation than just buses. But we're going to focus on buses for this presentation. I would say that I didn't look. Is Maurice with us yet? Is Maurice here? There he is.
I'm here, Stan.
Sure. In preparing this plan, I worked with Maurice and his transportation team. I don't know, Maurice, would you like to introduce the members of the team that are here? If they wanted to jump on camera, just to put a name with a face, that would help, just to show you who all was involved in helping prepare this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bahork and Board Member Ragland for giving this opportunity. We're very thankful to have our team here today with us concerning the transportation plan. Today we have here with us Gary Bright, Operation Manager of Transportation, Rob Weinhammer, Operation Manager of Transportation, and also Stephen Andrews, Fleet Manager of Transportation. They worked with us on this from a transportation standpoint.
And we also prepared the data in conjunction with our municipal advisory firm, Baker Tilly. They're here. We're going to have them introduce themselves when we get to the TIF presentation, because that's really their presentation. So you get to meet those folks at that point in time. But it was a collaborative effort of the Baker Tilly team, Maurice and his transportation team, and I. And me. I think this is a correct way to put that. Collaboration with me. Okay, good. So I'll go back. See if I can get my screen up again. So you'll hear us talk about life cycle replacement. You heard it last year when we went through the millage committee discussions, and I will continue to talk about this as this committee moves forward in the next 10 to 12 months, talking about the potential for a permanent improvement levy. But life cycle replacement is the buzzword that we use to discuss and describe the replacement of certain items in the district that have simply a life cycle. And when they reach their useful life, we need to replace them. So what is it and what is it not? What is it and what isn't it? I guess I didn't finish that sentence very well there. But typically we're talking about roofing and exterior doors and vans and lawn tractors and equipment like floor scrubbers that, again, have a useful life, and we need to have a schedule for replacing them over time. Life cycle replacement does not have anything to do necessarily with entire building renovations or building, a whole new building. Now, while some of these items might be included in a major building renovation, or if you build a brand new building, you certainly have to purchase some of these items. But when we talk about life cycle replacement, that process is really totally different and separate from our conversations about major capital investment in buildings. That really falls more within the purview of our FMP, our facility master plan discussions. And facility master plans are typically funded with a bond issue, whereas life cycle replacements are usually funded either out of general funds or through a permanent improvement levy. Now, a good example of life cycle replacement was the Operation Fix-It. And Operation Fix-It was a bond issue because we had gone so long and not addressed deferred maintenance items that we needed to jumpstart that program to the tune of about $125 million. So we did that through a bond issue. We actually got the authorization for $125 million in bonds in November of 2016. And we funded it through 2 bond issues. The first one was $75 million, and then we spent that down over a couple of years, and then we issued the balance of that, or $50 million, later on to fund the remaining projects. But that was a bond issue simply because we needed to do some things, kind of like I said, jumpstart that program. Life cycle replacement then is being funded through the $500,000 PI levy that was passed in 2016. And you'll see from this presentation, as well as my forthcoming presentations about life cycle replacement, that $500,000 levy that generates $4.5 million is more than just a tad bit short of meeting those needs. So this is what we mean by life cycle replacement. And for this discussion and presentation, and my focus today is on school buses. In January of 2002, the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services issued a report. And this report on school bus replacement considerations asked this question: are there factors that should be considered when developing and implementing policies for determining how long a school bus should be used for school transportation purposes? That was the question they asked. And some highlights of that caught my eye. First of all, the report wasn't intended to give you a precise replacement policy. What it did note, though, was this should be a planned process. So you need to have a plan for doing your school bus replacement. And I found it very interesting. If I were to ask you, if you had to come up with a replacement plan for vehicles, or even if you talk about your own personal automobile, what are some of the criteria? And I think we'd all say, well, age and mileage and condition and maintenance cost. And, those are kind of common sense criteria when it comes to evaluating when you're going to replace a vehicle. This report stated, though, that the single most important determinant of when school buses get replaced is available funding. So I think that speaks volumes, and hang on to that thought as I go through some other highlights. Clearly, this is kind of a common sense consideration, but this is the economic, when do you think about replacing a school bus? And it's that comparison between the operating and maintenance expenses of an older bus versus the cost to replace new and then reduce those operating and maintenance expenses. So when that scale tips, it's time to replace, buy a new one rather than continue to maintain. And again, using my personal automobile experience, if you've got a 10 or 12-year-old car and you go in and you got $3,000 worth of repairs, you may run through your mind, gosh, maybe the new car out there on the showroom might be a better investment than $3,000 into this older vehicle. As you read through the report, you'll see that the recommended number of years is 12 to 15, or they also state high mileage. And one of the things they pointed to were, for instance, special ed buses that might get extraordinary use may run up mileage faster than other buses. But there's more than just age of the bus fleet to be considered when you go to begin to replace vehicles in your fleet. For this topic, or for this presentation, I'm sticking strictly with age. We just picked age to give you an idea of how this would work under the general assumption that we would probably all agree that newer buses are less expensive to operate and more dependable, reliable than older buses. That's kind of the general assumption here. In addition, our own Office of Internal Audit, I think there are some people here from IA, and we're going to use their report as part of the rationale for this plan. Back in February of 2020, a little over a year ago, the issue number 1, I don't think they did these in priority, but in any sort of priority, but issue 1 in that report was that there was no funded school bus replacement plan in place. And that high in parentheses there is they identify these the issues that they find in terms of risk, and this was given a high risk. And they explained that in one paragraph where they mentioned here that the risk of not having that plan creates additional costs for repairs, and that puts a strain on the remaining fleet when you don't have that plan in place and get to replacing your buses properly. The recommendation that Transportation and Fleet Services formally adopt a viable school bus replacement plan that can be funded and is presented to the Board of Education for their consideration. A pretty tall order there, I think. Fleet Services managed to formally adopt a viable school bus plan. I don't know, we all got together, we went through this and we agreed. I don't know if that's formally adopting it amongst ourselves that it's a good plan. We think it's viable because it achieves some objectives that I'll go through. And now the question is, how do we fund it? And that's really the purpose of this presentation. Just to give you an idea of that life cycle replacement and where that sweet spot is and what the report from the National Association of School Transportation Supervisors said, and that is, here you see capital costs high in the beginning, operational costs low at in the initial stages, and then operational costs increase over time, capital costs come down. At some point, those lines cross, and there's a sweet spot in there that you're evaluating those maintenance costs versus replacing the bus, and that sweet spot in this particular case is around 12 to 15 years. So let's talk about the current status of our bus fleet. This first statement is not so much a status, but a statement about the importance of our bus fleet to transporting students. If we learn nothing else during the past 14 months in the pandemic, student transportation is mission critical to the district. You can't teach the children. Well, we do it remotely, but if you want kids in a classroom, you got to get them there. And we get them there with yellow buses. And it becomes mission critical. Student transportation was a critical factor in all the plans to reopen, whether it was hybrid or in person. It is just one of those critical variables that we have to address. So we need reliable student transportation. We have 854 buses. They're about 10.3 years in average, that entire fleet. They range in age from 1 to 24 years. Just restating what we learned from that informational report, that the estimated life for the industry standard would be 12 to 15 years. And that would be, if you're doing an even kind of replacement every year, you'd end up with an average age of about 6 to 7.5 years. So you can see we've got some buses that are outside that estimated life, and our average age is close to 3 years higher than what would be recommended. Well, how did we get there with that type of fleet, with the age and distribution of our buses? This is the purchase history, and as you can see, back in 2014, there were 300 buses purchased. We were bringing transportation back in-house from being a contracted service, and so you will see that in the distribution of our buses over in these 3-year age groups, we get a hump or lumps, if you will, in this graph. So you can see that of the 854, close to 600 of them are somewhere between 7 and 12 years. So all of those buses and those big clumps are coming up for maintenance and repairs kind of all at the same time, as opposed to spreading that fleet out over these years and only dealing with a smaller portion of your fleet in terms of maintenance and repairs, which would be a little bit more cost effective and easier to manage and better able to maintain it. So this is the look of our buses. So you can see about 69 buses that are fairly new. Again, almost 600 in that 7 to 12 range. And then we get out to where we've got a fair number that are 16 years or older. Just reiterating some of the implications of an older fleet: increased maintenance cost, you got reliability issues, and as I said, this uneven age group distribution of the buses really can wreak havoc with maintenance schedules. And they tend to reach the end of warranty, a large group of them, all at the same time. Well, how did we approach this analysis? I asked Baker Tilly to look at 11 and a 12-year replacement cycle. That means we'd be replacing, depending upon the cycle, 71 to 77 buses per year. We began with an estimated cost of each bus of around 100,000 and inflated that 3% annually. It turns out we need somewhere between 8.8 and 9.5 million a year to put this plan into place. Now, let me go back. Remember the $500,000 PI levy that we passed in 2016 generates about 4.5 million. So even if we use the entire PI levy, it doesn't fund our bus purchases. Just want to remind you of that. Part of the analysis was, well, let's initially fund this with an $80 million transfer from the general fund into a separate permanent improvement, or I'll refer to it as a PI fund. And then look at these replacement scenarios, both 11 and 12 years, and either spend the 80 million evenly, in other words, take 80 million and spread it evenly over 11 or 12 years and see what that does to the funding. Or let's just go ahead and spend the 80 million first, meet the requirement of every year and see when do we run out of money of the 80 million. Here's what we call cycle 1 of the 11-year plan. I would ask you to focus on these two columns. We identify here the breakdown of buses, and it shows which ones we're replacing and whatnot. Essentially, we went in and picked out the oldest buses first. So all that left-hand side of the chart there is just background data on how we made the calculation, not really an indication of how this would be implemented. Implementation comes later. That's up to the transportation department. But in this particular case, always replacing the older buses, you'll see that the average age will begin to drop from, what was it, 10.3. It begins to decline until we get to at around 2030, the 9th, 10th, 11th year, we finally get down to that 6-year average age of the fleet. And in fact, in this program, in this plan, it drops to 5.02 years at the 11th year. So let's look at how the 80 million does. If 80 million spread over 11 years is 7.272 million per year. We have an annual cost here of 8 million rising to over 10 million each year. And then the additional revenue needed is indicated here. And you can see that each year, spreading out that 80 million, you're short about 2 million a year, a little over 2 million a year on average. You'd be short in funding this 11-year program. Well, let's look at it if we just spent the 80 million to meet the needs of each year. When do we run out of money? Well, it's around 2030. You're still 24 million short, but you push that shortfall off to the final 3 years. The purpose of this is to say we're going to jumpstart this. We may choose to get a couple of years out of the 80 million, but then we have to seek another revenue source. And as I said before, that's a PI levy. And that's a segue into our discussions with this committee over the next 10 to 12 months about what do we need in terms of a PI levy to meet our life cycle replacements. This bus placement project is just one piece of our overall life cycle needs. So just keep that in mind. The numbers you see here are just one piece of what we'll be getting into. This is cycle 2, meaning years 12 through 22, that if we were to continue on that 11-year cycle, one, we keep our fleet age around 5 years, which is slightly better than recommended. It's aggressive, but we can maintain it there. We're still buying 77 to 78 buses a year. But just so you know, over the next 11 years, that's a $144 million program, about a little over 12 million on average a year. Again, keep in mind what we've got in terms of PI money being generated currently and what that just represents the need. Just graphically, here's what happens to your age of your fleet. And you can see it declines over time until 2032 when we do hit that leveling off at about 5 years. One of my favorite graphs, these are the buses, and they're grouped by age category. And the part of the graph that's really interesting is this diagonal right here. And you can see that over time, the first 3 age groups grow in terms of number and percentage of the fleet. So that by the time we get to 2030 or 2031, our entire fleet is in those front 4 age groups from 0 to 12 years of age. So that's how this plan's working out. I thought that was a very good graphical representation of that activity. Here's a 12-year cycle. We're now down to, again, looking at the average age of the fleet and the total buses we purchased. Instead of 77 or 78 buses, we're buying 71 or 72 buses a year. The average age of the fleet declines a little bit slower. You're not replacing them as fast. And again, right around 2030, 2031, you get down to the 6 years. This plan, by the end of the 12 years, gets us down to 5.5-year average age and not the 5 you get in the 11. That just makes sense because you've got a little bit longer replacement plan. Spreading the $80 million out over 12 years instead of 11, you now have 6.7 million available. The total cost to replace is a little bit less because we're buying fewer buses. And again, you can see that we're short each year to fund this plan. At the end of 12 years, it's about 26, but we've added a year. So 26 over 12, you know, you're 2.5 million short each year to effectuate it this way. And again, if you spend it all up front, you'll see the additional revenue isn't, you're covering yourself in the first 9 years, but you get to the 10th year, you've got to find another revenue source. And again, still 26 million short. Just different ways to look at the funding and what the need really is over the life cycle of this replacement schedule. This is cycle 2. Again, looking at the average age of the fleet, if we keep that up, we can keep it in that 5.5-year range, buying 71 to 72 buses a year. This is now $151 million capital need over that second 12-year period. And again, you're looking at needing, $12, $13 million a year. Just so you know, today, 1 mil in the district generates a little over $11 million. So this truly represents somewhere between 1 and a 1.5 mil PI levy need. And when you look at these long-term programs, you don't fund it. You don't just look at, say, 2034 and say, well, that's 10.5 million. Let's do 1 mil. That'll cover that. You have to look at how many mils do you need over that 12-year period to generate that $151 million in this part of the plan. And in essence, because the PI levy generates a flat dollar amount. So you're going to generate a little bit more money up front in this plan, build a cash balance, and then spend that down in the latter years so that overall you funded the whole plan. Well, we'll get into that when we get into PI planning and funding. Same graph about your age of the fleet. You can see that it drops down to that 5.5 range right around 2032. And again, my favorite graph with the diagonal, you can see here that by 2032, you're in those early 4 age groups. Interestingly enough, if we go back to that other graph, the size of the gray and the blue and the gray, the red, and the blue, and the green. The gray, the blue, and the red have gotten a little bit smaller. The green's gotten a little bit bigger because that represents the slowdown in the purchasing of the buses. But we still get there by 2032 to have a much younger fleet. My recommendation to the committee, and assuming the committee agrees and forwards this on to the board, my recommendation would be to transfer the 80 million from the general fund to a special separate PI fund. We would do that this June. I included that, if you remember, in my discussion about the May forecast. So if you ask me what's that do to the 5-year forecast, we already know. We saw it in the forecast that I presented at the April Finance and Appropriations meeting. I would recommend that we have the transportation, Maurice and his team and the transportation department implement an 11-year replacement plan in the spring of 2022. 11 years, because I think we need to address that aging fleet quickly, if not immediately. So take a more aggressive stance. Down the road, we may modify that. The team may decide to modify that, and we could slow that down. It will clearly, because you heard from that report from the National Association that the key criteria for replacing buses is funding. This will all be dependent upon future funding as well. And I would recommend a target of 2030 to reach that industry standard age of the fleet of 6 years for that. That's my recommendation and the rationale. I do have for you, hard to read, I know, I could read it to you, but this is the formal resolution. I consulted with my legislative writer, and he helped me, Dr. Rouse helped me put this together, but it pretty much just spells out this recommendation to send it on to the board, recommend that we fund it up front with 80 million to begin with, do the 11-year replacement cycle, start it in 2022, and target 2030 to hit that 6-year average age. So that is my presentation on, see if I can stop my report now, and I can address any questions you might have on the student transportation fleet replacement plan. And Maurice and his team are here to answer any questions you might have. But since this was a very high-level discussion, we're not talking about which buses we're replacing. We're just talking about how do you take that 854 bus fleet and manage one aspect, which is average age, and get it down closer to the industry standard. There are many other criteria that the team brought up to me, and I had to remind them, let's stick with age, because I know that when you get to doing replacement, there will be other critical factors that come into play, maintenance costs, specific bus reliability, things like that, that may cause them to choose a bus on the basis of something other than age. So I'm done. I'll be quiet. Vice Chair Ragland, get that right, and I'll turn it back to you for questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the presentation. I do appreciate the collaborative nature in which this presentation was developed. Definitely working with the Transportation Department of Fleet Services, as well as consulting with the Office of Internal Audit. This was really good, and it's absolutely necessary. I often say that the first interaction that our students have, the majority of our students have with this district on a day-to-day basis is with our buses. And this is so necessary. At this time, I'd like to make sure that we have answered any questions from the committee. So committee, are there questions on this presentation or on transportation in general as it relates to the resolution we're hopefully sending to the Board of Education today?
I have a couple, but go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to start with Mr. Miller, and then I believe that might have been I missed someone else. I'll start with Mr. Miller first.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ragland. I agree with it. The plan replacing it with age, I like the way you did it. That makes a lot of sense. My question really had something to do with something different. It was more about the newer technology in buses and whether they would be greener, whether that the newer buses would be cleaner for the environment, and whether or not they would, if in any of those cases, that could extend the useful life of those buses. I don't know anything about buses, but those were some questions. And then also, are there rebates? Because we would use greener buses, so to help get its costs down. So that's my question.
Thank you, sir. I think those types of questions would probably go to Mr. Oldham and his team. Mr. Oldham, if you can give us a little bit of insight. My question was around some rebates too, and I've got others, but no, I think both of those are kind of in your wheelhouse, Mr. Oldham.
So as far as the greener or the more cleaner burning bus, I would defer to Steve Andrews. But before that, we're always looking to see if there's any type of rebates or grants that's out there, and we try to take advantage of those. A few years back, we utilized the Volkswagen grant, which was a matching funding grant that allowed us to purchase buses. There was $2 million we was able to receive, so we was able to receive $4 million worth of buses. But we're always looking to see what type of grants. I know that my team is looking at some grants right now for, and Mr. Andrews can speak a little bit about that, for electric buses. So there's some challenge with us moving towards electric buses. The buses are constantly improving, but in many cases, the mileage did not cover one of our route, the miles we cover in one route. So that's constantly improving. And then there's the infrastructure will have to change with that. But Mr. Andrews, you can speak about those as well.
Thank you, sir. So we did speak to AEP, who is conducting a grant, and they're offering to offset the difference between an electric bus and a diesel bus. Right now, diesel bus costs about $100,000. The electric buses are $300,000. So they're offering us $250,000 for each bus we buy under this grant. Now, our buses travel about 100 miles a day. The first level of electric buses only cover 70 miles. So it requires, if we're going to get that first level of bus, to buy an advanced charging system. That advanced charging system generally requires upgrade to our bus compound so that our electric service is strong enough. So we are absolutely investigating that. And like Mr. Odom said, the VW grant got us cleaner engines. The EPA has demanded diesel engines be cleaner. But making those engines cleaner introduces maintenance costs. So as these new electric buses and battery technology improves, those costs will come down. So we consistently monitor, and we've prepared a package for the grant committee to buy 2 electric buses.
Thank you for that, Mr. Oldham and Mr. Andrews. Other questions from the committee?
I did have a couple.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Board Member Brown.
That's all right. First, for any of you, with respect to this schedule, I mean, I like it a lot. It makes a lot of sense. My question is, to what extent is this schedule that you're presenting modified because of the amount of money available, or is it, if the dollars weren't a big issue, and they are, what would the schedule look like then?
In answer to your first question, my initial thoughts were, I just did some quick numbers in my head, 854 buses. And quite frankly, when I started this, I thought the average life of a bus was 10 years. So, I divided 854 by 10. I got to buy, 80 buses or so. They're about 100,000 each. I figured that math out and knew that I thought that 80 million might carry us for no more than 10 years. I thought, well, let's try and fund the whole thing. As it turns out, mathematically, I was wrong. And it's more like, 8 years that we're going to make on 80 million. But the dollar amount that I came up with was generally just to jumpstart this, to cover the front end, because I don't know when another revenue source is going to come along. So that's really where the 80 million came from. It was something that I did in my head kind of really quick, quite frankly. As we fleshed it out with transportation, it seemed to make sense, but it did create this lack of funding to actually get us to where we wanted to be. You ask, if funding were not an issue, how would the plan be different? And I'll let the transportation speak to it, but what I've learned in our conversations is we have to smooth things out. So I don't know that they would go out and buy, 125 buses all at once. I think there's an amount of buses that you need to have being purchased in an effort to smooth out that age of your fleet, the age groupings of your fleet. So even if money was not an issue, it probably would go towards fully funding an 11 or a 12-year plan rather than advance, pushing forward the purchase of buses. But That's me from a finance perspective and several hours of conversations with the folks in transportation. So Maurice, let Stephen or Rob or you address, if money were no issue, what would you do? I guess was the question.
So I'll start off on that, let my team pick up. Again, I think the plan that's brought forward, again, as Mr. Bohorg mentioned, the goal is to try to balance the buses out over time. And so you don't have those spikes in buses and the fleet is coming end of useful life at the same time. So even if money went, we would still spread it out over that time that we have it now. And I think the plan of 11 years, it's within in that target. But Andrews, you want to add to that?
I agree with both parties. We have 300 buses. If they have a fault, all 300 buses have that fault. We're approaching the end of their warranty. So pretty soon, all those major faults are going to come out of our pocket instead of the warranty funds. So it also allows the engine companies and the bus suppliers to develop and refine their products. If they have a problem in year 2023, they'll redesign it for 24 and have it fixed by 26. So we don't swallow whole swaths of faults that they'll fix in the next year or two.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I guess the other question that is really not for today, but at some point in the near future, looking more expansively at the PI fund and where we need to be, how we need to increase that, or how much we need to increase it to get all of the PI funded projects at the right levels. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Board Member Brown. And I think Steve alluded to my question a bit. It's concerning availability of the buses and whether or not we would be seeking these buses at this rate from one particular vendor, or would we be using multiple vendors? And then as it regards the plan, does the plan help our vendors understand what it is that we're thinking and then help them prepare to be able to provide those buses for us? Understanding that this is something that we haven't done before, does that help our vendors? And then can they say, well, we're going to be able to provide you some savings because this planned approach is something that allows us to do what we do a lot better.
If I may, certainly purchasing 80 buses a year gives us purchasing power that salesman is going to cut his cut so he'll get the bid. Multiple vendors runs up against a problem with our fleet. We have very small garages. We have very small part storage. There'll be some common items, tires that fit all vehicles. We can spec that engine so that it's common by all vendors. But we run into space problems and storage problems to go multiple vendors. Not that we couldn't do it, it just becomes something to consider when we reach that purchase point.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other questions from the committee? Hearing none, I'd be remiss if I did not thank Maurice, you and your team, and especially those maintenance folks that work on our buses on a day-to-day basis. If you really look at it from this perspective, we've got buses that are past their life cycle. And if it weren't for those folks that are in the background doing this work every day to keep our kids safe first thing in the morning and in the afternoon and making sure that our buses are running, we would not be able to do what we do. And so you're a special group, and we really appreciate all that you've done, and really appreciate the professionalism of this presentation. So thank you all for that. Mr. Bohorg, I'm going to turn the floor back over to you to talk about the TIFs, please.
Well,
oh no, wait,
yep.
one moment.
Yep,
we have
one
to
moment,
approve
yeah.
the resolution.
Yeah, can I make a
That's-
comment though, real quick? Just a
Yeah,
point of clarification.
Yes, sir, please do.
I appreciate your comment about collaboration, and you included the internal auditor's office with that. I really didn't collaborate with them. I just simply used their report. So if that counts as collaboration, then I'll get credit. But we worked on this, and we saw it in the audit report, and we thought, quite frankly, thank God we've got an answer to an audit citation. So we helped. I think Steve Andrews was the owner of that item, and having experience of being owner of an item, many items in audit reports, it's always good to have something come up where you can check that box off. So the next time they report out, they can say, and we took care of that. So that was my consultation with them, was reading their report. So there you go. But yes, I would appreciate it.
Well, as chair,
if you'd like to do that resolution, I don't know if you wanted me to bring it back up or read it to you. I'd be more than glad
yes,
to do that.
if we could put that back on the, yes, if we could put it on the screen, and as chair of the audit committee, I think that is collaboration. Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work, definitely. So seeing that, we'll wait for the resolution to get back up on screen here, and everybody can get a gander of that. And then when comfortable, if one of the committee members can make a motion to approve the resolution, and then if there's a level of comfort, I'll entertain a second for that.
I believe you have the resolution now. Would you like me to go through that?
Thank you, sir.
For the listening audience, if you will. Whereas the National Association of State Directors.
Just high point.
Okay. The first whereas notes the National Association of State Directors of People Transportation report and about the better economic decision to replace high maintenance buses with newer buses, that they recommend the 12 to 15 years or high mileage as a criteria. It mentions that our internal audit department actually noted the lack of a funded bus replacement plan in their audit, and that we have presented with you what we believe a viable replacement plan and a recommended funding mechanism, at least up front. This committee would resolve that they recommend this plan to the board with the metrics that have been recommended, that it be implemented in the spring of 2020. The target being achieving the average fleet age of 6 years by 2030. And also that they would recommend that the board do transfer the $80 million into a separate PI fund. Hopefully that was the high points.
Yes, sir. Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion from the committee.
Make a motion to accept the recommendation that's presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll make a second to that motion.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ragland,
Yes.
Board Member Brown,
Yes,
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carried.
Thank you, sir. And now we are to discuss TIFs. And Mr. Bohoric, I'm going to turn the floor back over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. We undertook this project with our municipal advisory team from Baker Tilly to look into one portion of our revenue stream and attempt to validate that source of revenue. We're often asked, and again, pointing to the internal audit department, they often come in, and when we post a number, they'll often look at us and they'll say, how do you know that's the right number? And that's a great question. So this is a step in that direction, to take a piece of our revenue. This is TIF revenue, or tax increment financing revenue, which is really part of real property taxes, and go to the source and attempt to verify what we've actually received. So while I fire up the PowerPoint, I would ask that the Baker Tilly team come on screen, and I'll introduce Marvin Founds, the lead from that of their team, and he can introduce himself and his team members that worked with me on this project.
Thank you, Mr. Horick, Vice Chairman Ragland. Good to be with everyone this afternoon, and the other team members at Baker Tilly that really deserve the credit for the work on both of these projects, the bus replacement, transportation replacement, and TIF revenue. Jordan Peters is a manager with Baker Tilly. Maddie Smith is a consultant. Maddie worked on the transportation replacement program. And Logan Mason is also with us. Logan worked as a consultant and worked on the TIF revenue report.
Okay, good. Thank you. And so this presentation will primarily be done by Marvin and his team. I'm going to attempt to stay with them as I run the PowerPoint from my end. So we'll get started. And I believe if I did that correctly, we should be on the presentation. And Marvin, you can go ahead and lead the committee through this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we are revenue analysis from TIF areas that have been approved within the school district for, and this is a period of time for tax year 2019, which is tax collections in 2020. So that's the period of time that we were tasked to take a look at and review on behalf of the school district. On the next slide, the next couple of slides, we go through why a TIF is established and how they work. And then Jordan will be covering some of the details of the work that we did and the results. We have 4 bullet points here. The first main bullet point is describing why these are used. The last 3 are helping to describe how they work. What it is not, I guess that's a good place to start. Tax increment financing, or a TIF area, is not a tax abatement. In a tax abatement situation, the taxes are not by the taxpayer or by the property owner. In a TIF arrangement, the taxes are paid. The additional revenue that's received from the new project, and we'll just, for these first couple of pages, we'll use an office building as an example. A blank parcel, empty property sitting there, but economic development potential for an office building to take place. In order for that to happen, some infrastructure is needed, and the municipality or the city that is involved can access revenue from the new development, from the new taxes, to put in certain public improvements. So in most cases, it would be infrastructure along the lines of street, water retainage, water drainage, lighting, infrastructure for the economic development project to take place. In this case, a potential office building. The way in which it works is the agreements can be put into place for up to 30 years. And during that 30 years, the increase in taxes that come from that new project, the new office building, are diverted into a TIF fund. And then those revenues can be dispersed out in many different ways. One way is to pay for, one use can be to pay for those public improvements. The other way in which they can be dispersed out is back to the taxing districts, like the school district. And in this case, and in all cases for Columbus City School Districts, all of the TIFs that are in place are considered non-school TIFs. And what that really means is that the school district is held harmless or receives the taxes that they would have otherwise received on that new project. So with the task at hand that Jordan will get into, this project was really to confirm that the school district is receiving what it should be receiving from that TIF fund, that those TIF funds for those TIF areas that have been established. This last bullet point makes the statement that the existing property that was there before the TIF, so the empty parcel, the empty land, those taxes were being paid prior to a TIF being established, or they were being paid to the school district. That does not change. Those taxes are still paid by the property owner. They still go through the regular settlements to the school district. So on the next page, we have a visual here for visual learners. And you can see that we refer to the baseline property value. So this is the appraised value for this particular parcel or property that's in the TIF area. Overall appraised value, as you can see on the left-hand side. And then over time, what happens in the TIF area during the agreement of a TIF. Before the agreement is approved, there's already a baseline property value, which is typically vacant land or possibly a building that's going to be removed. But that baseline property value stays in place, and those taxes, again, are still paid to the school district through regular tax settlements. The incremental value, or the value that increases with the new project, the new office building in this example, is the area that's gold or yellow that you see here. So over time, as that developed and comes online, or multiple projects within the TIF area come online, you can see that that value increases over time until the termination date. And as I said, that's up to 30 years. It could be less. It could be 10 years, 15, could be less years. That increased value, again, referred to as the incremental value. At the end of the TIF period, the termination of the TIF, then all of that value comes onto the tax duplicate for the school district, and those taxes are then collected and distributed to the school district as they would normally otherwise been collected and distributed to the school district. So as if the TIF never occurred after the TIF is terminated or at the conclusion of the TIF.
And Marvin, just so I can interject here, as Marvin noted before, we have all non-school TIFs. So our revenue goes right up that diagonal. And what Marvin and his team were verifying was that portion of this graph from where it says creation, the left-hand tip of that triangle, out to essentially the right-hand tip into that triangle, or wherever we are currently chronologically in the TIF period. But they're verifying that that gold value in there that we're getting 100% of, that in fact that was calculated and distributed to us accurately. Okay. So TIFs are kind of funny. They levy the tax, they send a bill, the bill gets paid, and then part of that bill comes to us directly like every other property tax. And then this TIF portion takes a little side trip. It goes into the TIF fund, and then out of the TIF fund that gets distributed for all those uses that Marvin described. And it's that little side trip that we're verifying here. That's what we're doing. Okay. Okay, Marvin, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's a great segue then into the next slide that Jordan will describe our project that we provided.
Right. Thank you, Marvin. So in order to start the project, we reached out to the Franklin County Auditor's Office to retrieve the data, the parcel data associated with the TIF and the TIF areas. Within the district, there are approximately 50 to 55 TIF areas encompassing approximately 13,000 parcels of data that we looked at. And then Mr. Behort provided to us the tax settlements that he received from the county for tax year 2019, collection year 2020, so that we had the actual revenue that was received by the district. And then from that parcel information, we were able to break down the parcels into the different property classes so that we could apply the appropriate tax rate based on whether it was a residential or agricultural parcel or a non, residential agricultural parcel, or the also known as the commercial industrial class. So we applied the appropriate tax rate, and through that data achieved an estimated amount of revenue that the district should have received. And then we compared the actual value from the school district data to the estimated value that we calculated based on the county information. From there, we looked at the variances within the TIF districts and identified a few that warranted a closer look. Generally speaking, though, before we get into some of those specifics, there is a good chance that there will be variances for all of these TIF districts in some form or fashion. When we are dealing with TIFs, there could be positive variances as a result of, new TIFs could be established. They're established all the time and approved throughout the state. And so when those TIFs come online, so to speak, that could result in a positive variance in that TIF fund. There are also instances of when taxpayers may not pay, taxes in a certain year and hold off and pay that in the following year. So there would be several years worth of tax payments in there. Parcels also move throughout the TIF throughout the year. So it could move into a parcel could move into a TIF district, or parcels could move between TIF districts that could result in a variance. And then resolution of Board of Revisions cases that would ultimately result in higher assessed values than were originally included. When we're looking at reasons for why some of the variances might turn negative, some taxpayers might be late on their tax bills. Additionally, if parcels are moving into a TIF, they could also move out of a TIF. And so that would potentially result in a negative variance. Refunds on tax bills, and some taxpayers also, if there is a question on the value of their parcel, or if they're waiting on some change in tax status on their parcel, they may elect not to pay their tax bill, because some of those applications can be retroactive. So if your TIF area you apply in 2020, but it's not approved until 2023, it would be in effect in 2020, and so you wouldn't have to pay those bills. So that's some of the moving parts that we see within TIFs that can create variances in the revenue stream. So if we go to the next slide, this is the result of a summary of our analysis based on where the data that we received from the county. The district should have received approximately 76 million in tax revenue, but the actual revenue received was closer to 80 million, a variance of approximately 3.8 million. And so looking at the variances, the ones that we found most significant that warranted that additional some additional digging, there was a large positive variance of about 4.8 million that was a result of the situation I described. A TIF area was approved last year for the period of this analysis, and there were several years worth of back taxes that were then due on the day that the first payment was due for the TIF area. So that resulted in approximately 4.8 million of additional revenue to the school district. On the negative variance, there was a negative variance that we identified of about 1 million that we believe through our contacts is a result of a taxpayer potentially waiting on a change of tax status on their parcel, and a situation where they have potentially elected not to pay until that has been resolved. So when we take out those two, if we take out the 4.8 million and then add back in our 1 million of those identified variances, then had those two TIF areas come in as expected, then we'd be looking at a variance of about $54,000 total on the $80 million worth of revenue.
And Jordan promised me that over the weekend she'll find that 54,000. No.
Yeah, I only have 12,000 parcels left to go through.
I will point out, as you can see, the actual TIF payments approach $80 million. That is part of about 540 million that we receive in property taxes. So just to give you an idea, again, this is a piece of the overall property tax revenue pie, if you will, but it's something that because of how TIFs function, we wanted to reach out and verify that. Our plan, now that we've developed this baseline of data and gone through the analysis this year, our plan is to continue to do that on an annual basis. The next will be for tax year 20, collection year 21. So as soon as the settlements are closed, which will happen sometime in the August timeframe of this year, right after that, then the team can get started again, digging into the TIF records to begin the verification just like this for the current collection year. And then we'll have another report for you about this time next year. So we intend to just trust and verify. We trust that the number is correct, but it's nice to verify it. So I believe that's your last slide, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so I will stop sharing at this point. And Vice Chair Ragland, I'll turn it back to you. This was strictly informational, no action on the part of the committee, but it's just an effort that we took to verify some data to make sure that what we receive is in fact what we should be receiving.
Thank you, Mr. Bohoric, and thank you, Mr. Founds and Ms. Jordan, for your work, the entire Baker Tilly team for your work on this. Really appreciate this. Stan, my question to you is whether or not this particular report will be made available through the district's website. I think there's some good information on there, particularly the educational slides at the beginning that talk about what a TIF is. I think there's probably some folks that get real granular on those types of things and would like to know. That information was really good. So if this could be made available in some way, shape, or form, even if it is coupled with the minutes for this particular meeting, that may be helpful to some folks that want to take a deep dive into this, if that's okay.
Sure. And as you mentioned, Baker Tilly did provide a written report, which is an attachment on our board docs. And I can also make a PDF of these slides and attach it to these minutes there. And then I can investigate. We are working on, well, that's a collective we, like district. Communications is revamping our website, and it'll be such that we'll have some ownership of our particular site there. So we'll be able to put some links out there. So things like this that you would like to see referenced, we can put a link out there and as well. So if they go to the website and into my section. They can find that information, or if someone goes to board docs, we can have it there. So I'll look into that as well. But for sure, I'll have the PowerPoint as well as their written analysis available in board docs for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions for the Baker-Tilly team from the committee? Seeing none, again, we thank you, Mr. Founds, and your team for this well done presentation here, and look forward to working with you more in the future.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you,
Treasurer.
guys. You can all go home now, unless you'd like to stay for the last little bit. But thanks a lot for being here. And this is just one part of the services that they provide us. You know, they originally or primarily work with us on bond issues, but in the off time, I'm coming up with more and more projects for them to work on, like the bus purchase plan and this analysis. We've got some other things that we'll be talking to them here in the next few weeks. Specifically, Marvin mentioned that TIFs are not abatements, but we will be working with them on some abatement analysis kind of work. So we're going to try and keep them busy.
Good. Thank you for that, sir. I'm going to turn the floor back over to you for the last part of our agenda.
Okay, thank you. The last part of the agenda has to do with a kind of a quick, brief outline and overview of what's going on in my office. This is a reorganization plan that I have put into place. I've talked to staff about it, the superintendent's office, HR, we're in the implementation phases of it, if you will. Part of the impetus of this were my goals. I mean, the board sets goals for me, and goal number 4 was to build internal capacity. I will say that our missing member of the committee, board member Cole, I don't think a meeting with him and with me ever goes by without him asking me, what are you doing to build internal capacity in your office? And that internal capacity has to do with not only the capacity to do work, but the continuity of operations, the succession planning, even some career planning, some advancement for staff, building an organization that provides for that. Also, out of the PDK audit from last year in the fall, was a recommendation that a portion of what was the budget and grant office come over under my office and my responsibility. That's the budget part. The grant management part was then split off, and Catherine Mosier manages that on the superintendent's side. So we did effectuate that. So this was really the impetus for that. As you know, I had an unexpected vacancy in my office, and then I just recently had another resignation. And so all of this kind of reached a fevered pitch here, so that I got working on it. And I'm notorious for doing things creatively at 4 a.m. in the morning. So the staff laughed when I emailed everybody early in the morning and said, okay, we've got to work on this. What's our current organization structure look like? It's fairly simple. We have a controller's position that has most of the operational functions under that domain, which is this. There we go, get my laser pointer out. This section here, the controller with payroll, accounts payable, and grants financial reporting. That was in place when I came to the district almost 7 years ago. Also in place was this IT systems administrator that reported to me. And in this area, he worked with payroll systems, Kronos, and fixed assets. Kind of an interesting mixed bag of functionality. But those two positions were there when I arrived. During the time under my tenure, I created the Director of Financial Process Improvement because there was a big push for financial process improvements, both out of various audits suggesting that we need procedures and manuals in place, and we need to look at our processes to see how effective and efficient they are and how they might be improved. So that was a specific function that I identified and created that position for. Interestingly enough, it was really a repurposing of another position that supervised this special funds kind of student activity and also accounts receivable area. So as you can see, and then in last October, we just plugged in the budget department. So this grew and morphed without any real systemic thinking to get this alignment done that would make some better sense, quite frankly. So what's the new organization design that we're working towards here right now? Seems like there's a lot more boxes. There are about, I think, 8 more boxes here than there were before. But what I wanted to point out here, and the best thing to take away from this, is the following. I've now organized into 3 groups. This is the operations group. This is where case management, payroll, accounts payable, and accounts receivable will reside. And that's truly, when you think about financial operations, where those will be domiciled. The middle grouping here is finance and budget. This is the work done in terms of setting up budgets for all funds, for all areas of the district, instituting those budget controls, managing the appropriations, account codifications, all of that. The grant work in terms of grant accounting and compliance issues that we will monitor. That's the second grouping. And then the third grouping is in the area of data and processes. This is the process improvement function. And there are a couple of areas here that are brand new. We'll have two, what we call ERP systems analysts. They'll really become experts on our ERP system, both in terms of being there to answer questions from anyone else in the treasurer's office about how do I do this. They'll be experts to help us get answers to that, and rather than send our staff off to a help desk or to a online learning session when they're really doing the day-to-day operations, they'll have someone in-house to turn to that will be knowledgeable about that. And then also, as I say, the door will swing the other way as they become experts and learn not only what the ERP system can do, they'll learn how we're doing things, and we'll be able to make suggestions of, hey, the ERP system can handle this transaction this way. Maybe we ought to look at doing it in this manner and be a little bit more efficient. And lastly, there'll be a data verification analyst, which is a new position and function. And that really is, think of what we just did with the TIF analysis and verifying that cycle of information flow. There are so many other cycles of data flow that I believe need to be verified. Data that's collected in other areas of the district, for instance, and are entered into the EMIS system and flow into ODE, and then ODE processes that and they flow back to me in terms of a foundation payment. I want to close the loop on that and have someone verify that what's going in and what's coming out match up, and we're not doing that now. And I think that's a verification that I want to close the loop on. So I'll have these 3 groups. The red boxes are either new or repurposed positions. I believe at last count I had about I think 8 new positions, but 4 are repurposed in here. So there'll be quite a few openings, quite frankly. Most staff won't see any difference. The operations people will still be the operations people. They'll be grouped together. They'll be reporting a little bit differently, but day to day, they won't notice any difference. We'll be taking, an exciting thing, not to get into too much detail, but we're going to be taking our area treasurers that used to reside over there under those special funds. We're going to put them back here with the budget and finance group, and that'll align them with the budget analysts and providing that analytical support for our buildings and departments. So we'll really bolster that team and really focus their attention on providing that kind of financial support to buildings and departments. So that's in a nutshell. I'm working on job descriptions right now. We have a lot of positions to post. And anyway, we've got the positions to post. Our goal is to have start filling positions here hopefully by the 1st of June and get this in place by the 1st of August for the beginning of the next fiscal year. So we're excited about it. I think it will answer those questions that the board, tasked me with, meet those goals. We'll build some capacity. We'll have continuity of operations in terms of some of the assistant type positions we're creating, so that there's a shared knowledge there. So if someone isn't in, or unexpectedly isn't with us, we can have that knowledge base there and continue our operations. And then from a personal level for employees, they can see these positions as opportunities potentially for career growth and internal advancement, which wasn't really present in our previous organization and numbers of positions that we had. So that's where we are on that. Wanted to share that with you. We're real excited, and we're every day working on pieces and parts of that to get it implemented. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Questions from the committee on the department reorganization? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I miss there? I heard someone coming on. Okay. Board Member Brown, I see you've unmuted yourself. Are you trying to speak?
I have not. I guess I did unmute myself for what's coming up, but
Okay.
I do appreciate, Stan, I do appreciate the work that has gone into creating that. It looks a bit more streamlined. It looks a little bit flatter than before. And I think those are good things. And, I hope this is a plan that is, very workable.
Well, I'm happy about it. This is the biggest undertaking I've taken on in some 40 years. And I think, I'm very confident that this is a structure that will serve this office and provide the level of support to the district for years to come. We're going to empower those 3 senior managing directors over those 3 areas to operate highly autonomously and get their work done. And I'll be free to do, some strategic issues, spend more time on things like honing the forecast, the work I've done with legislative issues, some interagency work. That will be, I think that will serve not only my department well, but the district well too. So I'm excited about it.
That's
I
great.
may not look that way right now because I'm a little tired, but I am excited about it.
Well, 4 a.m. will do that. But let me just ask, what's the process for implementing this, and what's the timetable for doing so?
We're in the process of writing job descriptions for all the new positions. We will get those to HR. They'll review them for consistency. We will post positions, and then we'll go through an interview process, even for some current employees, some present folks that hold positions. We will interview, select, board approves those appointments. And so job descriptions now, post some positions. I want to post the top 4 or 5 positions as quickly as I can and get those going. Hopefully I'll have selections made. I'm pretty aggressive about timetables. I like to have those selections done by the 1st of June and get those to the board in June. And then we'll fill the other positions through the summer. I hope that we'll be fully implemented by mid-August.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And so that concludes our business for today. Before I entertain a motion to adjourn, I would like to announce that Columbus City Schools will be premiering to the public a documentary on the impact of COVID on the Fort Hays Dance Ensemble. The documentary is called The Afterglow. It will be presented on the Columbus City Schools YouTube platform at 7 p.m. this evening. And so I would encourage the committee to go look at how COVID has had an impact and and really kind of turn things around for a lot of our students that participate in our dance ensemble over at Fort Hays. It is a triumphant documentary. I've now seen it twice and I've enjoyed it both times. So if you're into dance, or even if you just like to know how students have coped with COVID-19, please view the afterglow today at 7 p.m. on the district YouTube site. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Vice Chair Ragland, this is Carolyn.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm sorry,
Madam,
before you
I'm
adjourn,
sorry.
that's okay. I would be remiss with not just kind of sharing the excitement regarding the fleet fund replacement plan. As you can see, that was a high risk item that we had identified in our internal audit. So I am very happy to see that that recommendation was, they took the ball and they ran with it. And I'm also very excited to see the succession plan. That's one of the things that we have also kind of been mentioning as a concern. So I'm very happy to see that that has been also picked up and ran with. So I'm happy to close those issues on our issue tracking. So thank you.
Yay. It takes me a little while, Carolyn, but I'll get to them.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. That is absolutely appropriate. I just, and I've said it several times, but I do want to reiterate, I love seeing the change in culture and the way that our direct reports are working with each other. As you know, Ms. Carolyn, we just received our first clean audit from the state auditor in over 20 years. And the way that our direct reports are working between Mr. Behort's office and Ms. Smith, as well as the superintendent and her administration, it really represents a culture change for this district. And really at the tail end of all of this leads to student achievement for this district, more efficiency, and the way that we operate is going to look different than it has at any point in the past. And so kudos to all three of you. I see the superintendent has turned on her video. Welcome, madam. I would let you have an opportunity to say a few words before we do sign off. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Dixon.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for those kind words. I love working with Stan and Carolyn. I've been trying to tell Stan that there's no retirement in his future. And Carolyn and I, say kudos to that. And it is refreshing that we're all working in concert. We all understand how important this organization must be kid-centered, and we must be financially sound, and we must be risk-free. And when you have that triangulation, you have a better organization for kids. So I just appreciate this committee and all the questions that are asked here, and making sure that Stan and we are working together and doing what's best for students. And we have to be financially sound, and we have to report. People want to know, what are we doing with our finances, and how are we changing the outcomes from students with the monies that we are provided. So thank you. This was, as always, this was a good meeting. I learned a lot. I keep my camera close because I want Stan to shine through these meetings. And so I keep my camera off. But it's always good meeting, and I'm just excited about the opportunities that we're going to provide for students. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that motion.
Unless yes, sir. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ragland,
Yes.
Board Member Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
and Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
And that motion carried, and you are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Meeting.
Thank